Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining. This is Flute Center's Key Insights with the repair team. My name is Lauren. I'm the Director of Services here, and I am joined by my lovely colleague, David, who is a wonderful repair technician. He truly has all of the insights. So I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with him and with all of you today. Wonderful. So just gonna get started here, David. How's that sound? I have a few basic questions that are not necessarily on the repairing itself, but are definitely worth addressing. So somebody asked, how can I schedule a repair? That's a wonderful question because we have an incredible new online scheduler. So while we love chatting with you and you're always welcome to give us a call or send us an email, you can actually do this at your own convenience online. Just go to flutecenter.com and under the services, there is an online scheduler for you to book your repair. So it's a wonderful new feature that we have, and the work is typically done for the time that you book the repair. They're really working on our efficiency here, and we want to get the flutes fixed for you as soon as possible. Okay, David, can you please explain the difference between a clean oil and adjust, known as a COA, and an overhaul?
All right. The COA is, as its name implies, a clean oil and adjust. What we do is we disassemble the flute, we clean the body, head, foot. We will re-oil the mechanism. If it's a pinless mechanism, it has a solid rod system. And if it's a pin mechanism, we remove the pins, oil the steel underneath the pins, repin it, and then we adjust the instrument. Generally, during this type of repair, we replace anywhere between 0, if it's nice pad system, all the way up to about 5 or 6 at the most. Anything more than that, we generally at that point would recommend a repad or an overhaul, just because of if you have that much pad wear and tear, it's probably almost all of them that needs to be replaced, if not all of them. The difference between that and an overhaul is on an overhaul, we also then refit the entire mechanism through a process. We could either rebuild your keywork, which involves us actually cutting the tubes and soldering on new tube sections. We generally don't do that. We do a process called swedging, which is basically we expand the tube back to the steels, then we trim everything to fit, and it's much more in depth. A COA takes anywhere between 4 to 8 hours to complete. An overhaul will take us a week to do, just because we're basically making the flute back to its original stock condition. So we go through, disassemble, we still do the cleaning, we do the oiling, we do the adjusting, we do all that, but then we also do key mechanical rebuilding. If we need to trim up the spuds and rechase all the threading, we will straighten up all the hinge tubes. We will swedge all the key work, replace all the pads, replace all the adjustment materials, replace all the felt, everything that is what I call biodegradable. In other words, if it's a part that is not metal, is replaced with new material. It's a very lengthy process that even on handmade flutes, we still touch up tone holes, that it just takes us days just in preparation to get ready to do the padding. And then once we start padding itself, if everything's set up properly, we're still looking at around 16 to 18 hours of work just padding. So it's a very, very long process that if everything goes right, buttery smooth, no major hiccups, it's a well-crafted handmade flute, we can shrink that down to about 30 to 36 hours. Yeah.
Great. And I see there is a question on this question here. Does what you're saying go for both metal flutes and wood flutes, or are there different?
Okay.
Great question.
Yes. If you're talking about a wooden flute, I'm going to use it in the context of assumption that you're talking about a modern wood flute like a Sankyo, a Yamaha, or something of that nature versus Baroque flute, or simple system flute. With modern wood flutes, it's exactly the same process that we would do a metal flute with. The differences are where we have to do wood treating and all of that. Generally speaking, the very first thing we'll do after we clean the wood is we will re-oil it and set it aside to let it sit for a day or so, just to let it acclimate and adjust out, so that when we come back and we do the tone hole touch-ups, if we have to redo, well, an example is if you send your piccolo in for a COA, we're going to do the exact same type of process with the oiling. We're going to let it sit, and then we're going to do all the process work on it. The difference is when you send in a wooden flute or a wooden piccolo in for an overhaul, We'll also do minor voicing adjusting. For instance, we had an old pal that came in that was very, very resistant. We did end up, well, I wound up actually recutting the head just a little bit to make it a little more open in the bottom end for the client at their request. We do still do the tone hole work. We still do all of these things, and I have all these weird custom tools that can cut inside and, from the top down and inside the flute and piccolo as well, to do voicing work and all of that to clean up the tone holes. Yeah, so we do pretty much the same work. It's just with wood, you have to be a little more delicate just because it's a lot less dense of a material and it's a lot easier to go too far too quickly. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
For anybody like myself who's not a technician, which I think there's quite a few here who are not technicians, if you have any questions on some of the very technical terms that we're saying at times, just write them in the messages, and I'm sure David is happy to explain what swedging is and things like that. So if anybody is unsure.
Yeah. And swedging is literally what we do is, we'll use our fix-it tool here as our example. Inside here is a steel, and you can imagine this is your key work that this rides on. And what we do is we take the silver component, because it is not as hard as steel, and we recompress the silver back to the steel to conform to the steel, and then we slightly stretch it just a little bit, not millimeters or hundreds of thousands of an inch. We're talking, very small, minute amount, and then we refit that keywork back down to its proper size to fit between the other keywork assemblies to make sure everything is matted properly at 90 degrees. What this does is it prevents lateral motion in the keywork itself, and also prevents, actually we have a flute right there.
We do have a flute.
Use a flute. That way everyone can understand. Okay. So what swedging does is it prevents the keywork from sliding this way and rocking left to right and vertical along the steel itself. A lot of times what you can have with older instruments is posts get knocked out of adjustment, alignment, the silver wears on the steel. And silver is a lot of, especially older flutes that have 900 coin silver, or what we refer to as 900 coin silver. It is a lot softer material, of course, than steel. So when those two substances rub together, the silver just wears out. It just gives out over time. So we just refit everything back to the steels. That way your flute feels nice and has a nice smooth feel in the action. So when you're playing it, it feels a lot more precise. Modern pinless mechanism, doesn't really have that sort of issue. There's not a ton of contact with modern pinless, and they're not as prone to wear as quickly because of the type of steel they use. They use a more polished stainless version now versus high content carbon that they did back in the around 1930s until around the 1980s ish, when they started to really launch into research and development with flutes. You can thank Albert Cooper for that.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
David, somebody was very interested in knowing how you began your career in instrument repair, and I'm pretty curious too. I know a lot about your professional career, but yeah, how did you get started in this? Where did this all begin?
I've always been kind of a engineering type mind. I see a problem, I have to solve it. It's one of my most endearing qualities. It's also one that drives everyone here crazy, because they'll be like, go to lunch. And I'll be like, no, just got to fix this one thing. Yeah, that one thing's been bothering me for like an hour now, and it's a roller. It doesn't roll properly. But I started my career in 2006. I apprenticed out with a gentleman in Houston, and I worked there for about 2 years. And I transferred again to another shop, continuing my apprenticeship into I don't want to say master status, because it's more of a journey. So similar to plumbing trades and electrical trades, you have apprentice, journeyman, then you have a master and senior master technicians. I was there at that shop for 10 years. And during that 10 years, I decided I really wanted to focus on high-end flutes. So I started studying with anyone I could literally, who would have me is my line. And so I went from that shop, then I became the manager of another shop, and now I'm here at Flute Center. That is a very compressed edition of coming up on 18 years of doing this. And it's not until the last, I would say around 6, that I've considered myself good.
They're always so humble, these repair technicians.
And I actually do have a saying. I call it, and listed later in a question, is ABL, always be learning. And that's something I think that's true for all of us. We could always learn more about something. But if you're interested in beginning a career, apprenticeships are a good way to start. If you have a local shop you're interested in learning at, of course, contacting a maker if you're of an age where you can afford to live and work in that sort of environment for a maker, feel free to do so. And then there's a third one I had listed.
Well, actually, that brings me to one of the things that I had on here was keep your eyes out for some new things from Flute Center. I mean, we have seen that there is a need for some type of education with this. I think, as you mentioned, finding makers, finding anybody that will train you, basically taking an apprenticeship, that's pretty difficult to do sometimes. So there is a huge need for it, and we see the need for that. And we're going to do our best to really solve that problem. So, and if anybody here that's watching is interested in learning flute repair, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. Definitely happy to chat and see if you can get a little bit more insights of what's brewing behind the scenes. So wonderful. Okay, what is the best way to check for leaky keys or pads?
All right. For players in general, there's not a great way, unfortunately. Most of the time, whenever you finally discover your flute doesn't work, it just randomly stops playing. But if you do feel like you have a minor leak in your flute, the best and easiest way to do it is to, we have what we call it the play test. It's not a performance level playing. We're like, oh, we're playing to really play the flute. No. My theory is, if I'm a 260-pound guy, and I'm very big, and actually I feel like I'm sitting like this right now. Small spaces in New York. But I always play test as if I'm like a small child, like I'm a 7-year-old child in terms of play test ability, just to see if the pads are sealing. And every time you play test, everything should sound immediately. So bear with me. Very light fingers, very light air, and every note sounds immediately. That's what you're listening for. Other things to hear for are tonal color changes. So notes that don't quite sound right. An example would be the three options for B flat. If you have a B flat that sounds I don't know if it's really showing up on y'all's end, but you can hear those. Oh, no,
we didn't hear anything there.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you go.
The flute played perfectly.
Well, the flute was great, guys. And here's another way we can do it. Do you have any? Oh, the alcohol wipes are over there. We'll need one because
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's another way of doing it. Just go to a friend who you trust, who also plays flute, and go, hey, play test this for me.
Okay.
Yeah. And you don't have to.
No, yeah. Then I would play.
Yeah. And then that's what happens is, here at Flute Center, everything I do, I play test. I'm like, oh, it's fine. We hand it off to 2 or 3 other people to check it for us, to go, hey, yes, this is great. And if it's not, they come back and say, hey, there is an issue. I don't know why I didn't pick up. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that you didn't pick up. But the idea is, if you play with a soft air, soft fingers, you want immediate sound. The best way I could describe it to you is like if you're listening to a CD player or a podcast, wherever, and you just keep hitting randomly stop, start, pause, play. That's the sort of sound you should hear. It's immediate response. You don't want to hear a floom into the flute sound. You don't want that. If you're going from B flat to A, you want immediate A. And you want to hear that immediate change every note. If you don't hear that, it could be a minor leak, or it could be an adjustment out, or you have a pad that's not sealing, stuff of that nature. But you always want to hear immediate sounds. If you don't hear that, well, then you might have a small leak. And as always have someone, double check it. It's very common for us.
Yeah, and I'm going to hand that back to you. I will also add, as again, someone who's not a technician, but is a flute player and is also, I'm sure, like most of you here, a huge perfectionist and always thinks that it's my fault if something doesn't go well, you know, I didn't practice enough. It's all on me. But actually, if trust your instinct, if you're feeling like something's not right, it's actually probably the flute and not you. So don't fight that feeling. You know, trust that it's okay, that flutes need adjustments, that they get out of alignment. And if something doesn't feel right, it's actually probably not you. So bring it in, you know, bring it into us. We're happy to take a look. We do free consultations as well. Definitely want your flute playing in tip-top shape. And don't blame the flutist. Sometimes you need to blame the flute.
I have what I call the 90-10 policy. 90% of the time, it's the flute. 10%, it's woodshed time to go practice a little bit.
Sometimes you do need to practice. You're right, but
like that high C is just not. I can't help it, man. But yeah, and added to that is one of the questions that we routinely ask is what can people do on their own? We do have this handy dandy little tool that we sell. It's called a fix-it tool. One end is a screwdriver. There you go. And the other end is a spring hook catch. It's a very simple tool to use. And this happens quite often. We see trill keys come in, or we have keys that come in and they're floopy, or they just kind of droop. You know, this is a low B, it should be sprung open like this, and it's not. And you're like, oh no, I have a performance. With the spring hook catch, it's like a little crochet hook. You just put it back on and boom, problem solved. Another thing is you could use a screwdriver end if you have a screw that's backed out. It's very common on like your C key, or one of your rollers, or like your low B rod here. Like I said, I'm trying to see. Yeah, there you go. Great. Yeah, there we go. And once again, use the screwdriver end just to screw that back in. And if you have an issue with a key that continually comes out, or a rod that comes out a lot, for instance, like your thumb B flat or C, or you have a pivot screw in the low D post that doesn't like to stay in, what you can do is you can actually take clear nail polish. I do not recommend anything heavier for individuals. Clear nail polish is an acrylic. It dries, it gets stiff, a little stiff, and it acts as a very low holding Loctite. Do not use red Loctite. Do not use anything heavier. Don't use cyanoacrylic glue or super glue or Gorilla Glue. Clear nail polish is fine. All you need to do is put a little drop across the opening of the post here with the rod screwed all the way in, and it'll hold in place. You don't really need to add it down here to the threads. I've seen it happen where people accidentally, or intentionally rather, do that, and they actually wind up causing the keywork to bind, because now you now have acrylic inside the tubing, and it causes the keywork to not respond properly. So generally, I don't recommend you do that, but if you do have a constant issue, put a little, just a little smear. That's all it takes. And that way it'll actually stay in place, and you can get through your performance so that you can come see a technician.
Great. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there were quite a few questions of that nature just asked in different ways. And yep. I'd say based on, you know, what you just explained, really moral of the story is if it's something you can confidently fix and it's a small thing like that, great. But if you do have any doubts, you know, that's why we're here. Yeah. That's why, you know, David spent 17 years training. So yeah, don't want more problems to be caused.
Yeah. Awesome. And our next thing is someone says, you know, if they would like to make self-adjustments because something's not seated correctly. If you do have a flute that has adjustment screws, this is a Muramatsu, so Muramatsus have adjustment screws on the back side here. Gemeinhardts have them in the front. Other makers have them in the front as well. Your mileage may vary based on your manufacturer, your flute maker rather. And if you feel comfortable slightly turning the screws and playing the flute, and keep in mind the distances you're trying to cover. If you're thinking about it like in terms of a clock from 12 to 1, it's a very small turn. but now we're adjusting things literally hundreds of thousands of an inch. So you can make your flute play really, really poorly, really quickly, just by going crank. And here in the shop, I have a joke. I call it the imaginary screw turn. It's where you turn your screwdriver, but did it really turn the screw? You don't really know. And then you play and you're like, oh, it did. Okay, that's great. Because that's how minute and small the adjustments we make are at times, where it's to put it mathematically in terms people can understand, it's half 100,000. So it's 1/6 the thickness of one hair on your head. If you were to pluck a hair and then cut that one strand in 6 layers, that's 1/6 the thickness of what we deal with. That's the fine motor skills that we need as technicians to define what's going on with your flute, is that thickness and that thickness alone. And that's it's a very fine adjustment.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have players who go, it's too much. And so we have to go back a 5,000. So it's player specific on how far is too far, but those 5,000 adjustments are what we're dealing with daily. And sometimes players like them, sometimes players don't. They feel like it's too much or it's too little. And that's the reason why we have different people play test, is everyone feels things differently. Everyone plays a little differently.
And speaking of how things feel, we do have a question here that's related. It says, can you adjust the height of the keys? Because that is something that can also be, personal preference.
Yes. Key heights come stock generally from manufacturers. Like right now, I'm adjusting a flute. Japanese manufacturers generally set around 3 millimeters. American manufacturers are just a slightly higher. We use 100,000ths of an inch, so it's a little different there. This particular flute came in, the key heights were closer to 4 millimeters, which is really, really too high for this particular model. So we're doing a full COA on it, and we not even told the customer we're doing this, but we have to lower the key heights back to the original specification, just because one of the complaints was the tuning. So when there are considerations on this, and this might get a little technical heavy. If it does, somebody please just post it and ask for clarifications. But if you're familiar with the sounding length of the flute, it's actually the entire length of the flute. For instance, this is your foot joint, of course. This is where low B comes out on this end, not here. It's actually down here. But then this is actually your low C tone hole. This is your C sharp. This is your, excuse me, my brain just went blank, C sharp. And this, of course, is your D tone hole, right? So we got that. You can affect the entire tuning on the right hand of the flute just by raising or lowering this set of keywork. If you lower it too much, your flute's going to be really flat. It's going to sound flat in the octave tunings, not the octave, excuse me. The tuning scale going in the overtone system is not going to be correct. So it's going to have issues. If it's too open, the flute can play too sharp, and you'll have issues there as well. Another fun, I don't want to say argument, but another fun thing that a lot of people don't really understand is, if you have an open hole system flute, the actual placement of the tone holes is different than if you have a closed hole system flute. Brandon Brothers does actually a partial, which is a little, it's really cool, but it's a little different than most other makers.
It's really interesting though. Can you explain why that is?
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I have to pull a flute apart. So if you're looking at it this way, and actually this one's plugged, good, because that'll affect it. The reason it has these holes, of course, is we have modern flute techniques which require partial offset, with your fingers and all that fun multiphonic stuff. Traditional flutes, circa pre-Louis lot, really did focus primarily on closed hole systems because they were using Boehm's mechanical theory in terms of actually building the tuning scheme of a flute. Like I said, there's a lot in this noodle that just goes off on random tangents. Please, if anyone has an issue, let me know.
I'll let you know.
So the spacing here between these two notes, if it's not plugged, if it's a closed hole system, we'll say it that way, is different than if you unplug it, because now we have a larger vent hole, so more air is escaping. So at that point, you can change the internal tuning scheme just by putting the plugs in, and you can see this flute has plugs in. So it's not a ton, but you can actually affect the tuning of your flute just by installing and removing plugs. It's random, I know, the amount of weird stuff I happen to know, but that is an actual thing. You can affect your tuning. It doesn't affect the sounding length. Once again, it only affects the actual tuning scheme. In other words, the overtone set. So you might notice your second or third octave is playing differently than if you remove the plugs and then you try again to play your second and third octave in your flute. That's the ranges it's most notable, because at that point, the actual interval gets smaller and smaller if you look at it in terms of a graph. All right.
Great.
Sorry.
Thanks for sharing. No, I think it's all really interesting. Okay, great. Back to some of the questions here.
Yes.
Somebody asked, you have to bring in a new flute after purchase for a tune-up. How should you prepare a new flute when you first get it? So the answer is yes. You should definitely bring a new flute in for a tune-up within the first year, even if you're feeling like it's not completely necessary to you. That's why we offer our standard service guarantee for 12 months, 18 months if you're in the Teachers Club, because of that reason, because flutes are instruments and we're playing them. It went from not being played to now being played probably daily. And it needs that checkup. And of course it's there for a reason. So we want you to utilize that. Let's see. Is a tune-up different from a COA? That's a great question as well.
Yes. A tune-up is kind of, how to describe this. The standard service guarantees, the SSG is what we call it. So we'll use that nomenclature. That way no one gets confused. Our standard service guarantee is kind of like a courtesy check when you take your car in to just, hey, it's nothing's really wrong with it, but we just, as a courtesy, we go through the flute. Sorry, there's another question. I'll get to that in a second. So yes, there's a difference with the standard service guarantee. We go through the flute, and generally speaking, in the first year, really first 6 to 8 months is when you're going to notice pads start shifting a little bit due to the compression of the felt and the wool and the material the flute is just made of. So you'll need some minor adjustments there. Then if anything else you don't like, for instance, what's common on new flutes right now? So just materials generally compress. Can lead to some lost motion, and people who are particularly, we have a coworker who's very, very light touch. And so just a little bit of lost motion, it drives him crazy. So you have to, be really on top of that for players such as that. It doesn't, it's not a bad thing to have your flute looked at. It's like if you have a new car, it's that first checkup. There's nothing wrong. But just to make sure it stays in tip-top shape, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Any small thing you don't particularly like about it, we can change at that point as well.
And also just to note that, it is really important to bring your flute in every year. So the first year, we obviously cover that under our standard service guarantee, and it might not need that full servicing, but after that, we do recommend a clean oil and adjust once a year. I've had clients call that say, my flute hasn't been serviced in 10 years. It's in perfect playing condition. Yeah. That's kind of an oxymoron there. So you really want to make sure, again, just so that you're having the best experience playing it and you're not overcompensating in any way, the flute is going to last longer as you maintain it well. Great.
Yeah. And real quick, there's a question here that's been posed of tone hole diameters change between closed hole scale and open hole French holes. Makers generally don't, I have to say individual makers, like for instance, if you play on Maker A flute, Maker A uses the exact same tone hole sizes. What they actually change is the location of that tone hole on the body tube. And we're not talking drastic measurements. The difference is between, like an example, the sounding length of the entire tube for a 440 flute versus an A442 flute is approximately 2 millimeters. And that's like that big. So we're not talking drastic movements, but we're talking a couple hundred thousandths of an inch or a couple hundred thousandths of a millimeter either direction. And it really drastically affects the tuning. Like I said, the higher up you go into the scale. And once again, that gets off into a random tangent, but yeah, so the tonal diameters really don't change that much. Yeah, 2 millimeters is a mile. Someone posed, I don't know if you guys can see the questions, but someone posted 2 millimeters is a mile. And yes, it is a lot in what we do. That is true. So yeah, on to the next.
All right. Any harm and never putting your flute away. Aside from a little tarnish, is there any harm, pros or cons to that?
Okay. In putting your flute away, no. It provided, of course, you're properly wiping it down and swabbing it out. Other than tarnish, there's no harm in doing that. Now, if you do leave your flute out, especially if a silver flute that happens to be around the 900 series coin silver, I don't even like using the phrase coin silver because it's actually not really coin silver. That's a completely, but it's 900 jewelry silver. It will tarnish very quickly. It's just an unfortunate side product of having a silver instrument. The higher up you go in the silver purities, so if you go for like 925, 943, 991.7, 958, the more corrosion or more resistant it is to tarnish. That's not to say it won't turn color, but it is more resistant to. Unfortunately, if you do leave it out, sulfides in the air will still cause the oxidation problem to happen, and it will turn colors. It happens naturally. It's oxidation. There's nothing I can really do about it. So if you don't really like the tarnishing, then
Well, I see a great solution here. Gold flute, problem solved. Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that's an excellent solution.
Gold or platinum alloy or platinum, yeah, feel free. We love those too. Trust me, I'm finishing up 14K. Yeah, I mean they're great too. They don't really have the tarnishing problem. Anything above around 9K really is kind of where that is. If you have a 5K or 3K, 5K, some 9Ks depending upon the alloy. But once again, the higher up you go, the more resistant it is to tarnishing and discoloration, that sort of thing.
And with leaving your flute out, as David mentioned, there's no harm to, the flute itself from a repair standpoint, but I have seen some crazy accidents happen as well, flutes that are not actual like straight. So just be careful, just a side note there.
We have a good question.
Great question here. Yeah.
To remove silver from a flute on your own, you can purchase cloths with silver in them. Silver polishing cloths, what they refer to. They actually contain a product called diatomic earth. It's very fine crushed sea creatures, basically, is what it is. And it does a great job at removing tarnish from a flute. You can use other commercially available or residentially available silver cleaners. If you do that, please do so with the understanding and caveats of one, be careful around any moving part of your flute. So keywork, pads, felts, any of that stuff. You can accidentally, just by the motion of wiping this here like this on these keytails, knock these felts off as they're just glued on. And they are felt. So that shear force, they don't have a very high shear force, so you can accidentally wipe them off by trying to polish your flute. I do recommend, if you do polish, use your index finger and kind of go around the keywork assembly and then stay in the big areas. Don't try to get too detailed with it. I know it does build up in between the keys and all of that. I mean, if you just have to use a Q-tip or something of that nature, but just bear in mind that if you do get it on a pad, unfortunately, there's no great way to take it off other than just replace the pad. So that can get very costly to an individual very quickly. Unfortunately, we do see it in the repair shop where someone purchases a flute, they try to clean it themselves, they wind up getting silver tarnish all over it, tarnish remover rather all over it, and now they need a repad, which is $1,800 here currently. Sorry.
And as David mentioned before, there's no harm to the flute with the tarnish. My flute, it's also sometimes has to deal with just the acidity in your fingers. And so my flute is very heavily tarnished. I personally love it that way. I think, it shows how much I love it and want to play it. So it can also build some character as well. Great. Is there an easy way to replace flute or piccolo pads on your own?
Absolutely not. The truth of the matter is there's no easy way to do it. We have to use, depending upon the pad system, I have to start with that. Everyone kind of has a particular pad they prefer. Currently on the market, there's a standard felt pad. And even in that category, there's a woven felt versus a pressed felt. They do respond differently in terms of how hard the actual felt is. and how squishy and compressive it is. Some of them are built like marshmallows, where you can just grab them and squish them and they just pop right back up. Others are so hard, you would think you're dealing with a more synthetic pad like a Straubinger or a Pisoni S2 series. Those have a Delrin backer, which are more difficult to deal with. And then you have the Muramatsu pad system, which actually uses its own proprietary system called the Lotus assembly to use and install. Then there's the Schmidt pad, which has an aluminum backer. Currently under development, and this was a question that someone asked as well, is can we get away from gluing and shimming? The answer is yes. People are possibly, I'll say it that way. People are currently experimenting with rare earth magnets to help hold pads in and cause, as also as springs, to get away from using gold or platinum alloys or stainless steel as a spring wire. And so people are experimenting with magnets. People are experimenting with all sorts of new silicon type materials. Neoprene has been used on some flutes as well with some success. So there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of research and development. And to add to that actually is Nakahara Flutes actually is their own proprietary pads developed by Mr. Nakahara himself. So there's a lot of R&D that goes into these things. And yes, eventually we would or should hopefully get to a point in terms of technology where we can get away from gluing and shimming. But however, for practical purposes, the answer is no. There's no way to get around gluing and shimming.
There's hope for the future.
There's hope for the future, just not here yet. And so with that being said, I generally don't recommend individuals take on redoing their own repair work, unless of course you're doing it just as a self-experiment, like, oh, can I replace a pad? And then there's tooling and training that goes into it. So I generally recommend individuals who do try it start out with very, very low level, student level type flutes that you can possibly purchase, used for just a few dollars. And of course, buying the requisite materials to do it. If you want a quick list, I would say go with a woven pad of a decent manufacturer. So, I don't recommend you buy your pads off eBay. Musiccenter.it sells to pretty much anybody, but keep in mind it's in Italy and it's a process trying to get things from them, and just trying to understand what is physically going on. Jim Phelan has a fantastic book that he made several years ago about flute repair. It's a great manual to try to read. Also, I believe the Rosca is a great book as well, if you can get your hands on that. And there are several books that you can just read. And if you want to really try to do it yourself, feel free. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to say don't. What I will say is if you do have a nice flute, don't. That is a recipe for disaster. I've seen people, unfortunately, literally destroy a $15,000 flute because they thought they could do something on their own. And I recommended they send the flute back to the manufacturer for remaking just because they messed it up so badly. Yeah, it was really unfortunate, but there's nothing I can do.
Okay, so
Yeah.
trust the experts.
Yes.
Great. Do you notice any differences in the condition of flutes, especially corks and pad, due to altitude or humidity levels?
Yes, and I had a small. I have so many papers over here, by the way.
You're doing great, David.
Sorry. Yes. Where I come from, I'm actually just moved to New York and been a Pure Flute Center now for just a little over a year. Wow. Seems like just yesterday. And where I'm from in Texas, in Houston area, the Gulf region is very humid. So we would have issues all the time with rust issues, mold and mildew issues, pads that get sticky, just all sorts of problems associated just with the humidity, just because it is so high. To give you an idea, currently it's 72 here in Manhattan. It's currently 98 in Houston, and it feels like 110 due to just the humidity. Yeah, it is not nice there right now. Some of my friends texted me that earlier, and I just kind of sent an LOL and bragged about the weather here.
Well,
no,
I'll
it's
stop
currently,
complaining.
yeah, it feels like 110 currently in Houston. That's just the level of humidity we have can cause so many issues. Professional flutes with synthetic pads like Straubinger S2s, the Pisoni S2s, what I'm referring to, Muramatsus generally don't have large changes in the pad types and structures. The reason for that is there are synthetic composites. So they use ultra suede interiors, Delrin backing, which is a type of plastic, or metal backers to hold adjustment. And then on top of that, they use hydrophobic paper, which is paper that it doesn't like water and it doesn't really respond well to water. Or they use mylar, which is plastic. So all of those things, the pads are more stable. Student intermediate flutes, because they don't have those particular products installed on them, they have woven felt pads, paper shims. They can actually adjust up to 20%. So it is a huge change. And when we're dealing with, once again, measurements of a half thousandths is what we ideally try to get it to. We've now gone from a half thousandths to a full thousandth, just by shipping a flute or by having a flute change humidity levels. So it really can alter just the way your flute plays based on the humidity. That's the reason why I always recommend don't leave your flute in the car. Always carry it with you inside a building. Try to keep it at relative constant temperatures. Don't let it get wet. All of these things, because it can, if you have an older system flute that uses traditional pads, felt pads, can have drastic changes across your flute just for small amounts of time. Yeah.
Great, thank you. This is an interesting question, and we touched a little bit on this before, but how does one become a master technician? What is the route of training for this? And that's, again, for those of you who are seriously interested, please reach out to us. Like I said, something is brewing here, and we're always looking for anybody that wants to learn. So
that is a true statement.
Without further ado.
Okay, so how to become a master technician? First of all, like any trade, and this is something that I tell everyone, I do not view time in the field as necessarily one who's achieved master status. There's a reason for that. You can say I've been doing something for 40 years, but if you've been doing it incorrectly for 40 years and you haven't really learned anything in 40 years, well, you've been doing something bad for 40 years. Sorry. My take on what a master technician is very simply is a person who, it doesn't matter if it's flute technician, your plumber, it goes across all the trades. Someone who has a dedication to their craft. What that means to me is a person who is always what I call ABL, always be learning. Someone who goes, hey, I don't know something, I need to learn that thing. For instance, here at Flute Center, Lauren can tell you, or someone who's worked here before can tell you, or if you just want to call and call, I call it nerding out on flute. I'm always reading books about flute acoustics, flute theory, you name it, I've probably read it, like Bernard's Book of Acoustical Physics, anything of that nature. I've contacted makers going like, hey, how do you do this one thing? And some of the information they will not share because it is proprietary, but I call it ABL, always be learning. And you would be surprised at how many people get to a point in life or career and they're like, I'm good. And if you want to be truly great at anything, you can't do that. You're at the top of your field, great. Research and development takes in now. You need to go further. And that's how a person really becomes a master at anything, is just refuse to stay still, always move forward, trying to learn something you're passionate about in your field. You don't have to be the best at something. You just have to be willing to put in the time and dedication to do it properly. A great quote that is often said, and actually the Straubinger family of flute makers and pads has a saying. It goes, where quality is not compromised. And the first time I saw that, I was like, wow, that's a true statement. So anything we do here at Flute Center, the very first thing we push is the quality of whatever we do. It's from this what I do, repair side of things. This reason why it's checked by so many people is because we want our customers first and foremost to know they're getting quality back when they get their instrument. The same with our sales team, same with anything we do here. It's quality first. And I think that's been a winning formula for us here at Flute Center, New York, but always be learning. And if you always learn something new every day and you pursue that dedication every day, one day you wake up and you're looking back going, wow, I know a lot. and somebody goes, hey, you're a master now. And you go, oh, okay. And then you go, no, I'm not. I still have things to learn about myself currently. You know, I'm the phrase I believe is used as senior master technician because I've been doing it for so long. But I actually had a call from, I was talking to a maker today and I said, hey, I would love to come visit you to learn your process. So you never stop learning. You never do. And that's what separates a master, a real master, from someone who just does it. And
that's great.
You know, yeah.
Some good life advice too. Thank you. Great. So the next question, how do you know when it is time for a flute upgrade? So I'm going to kind of answer this in a two-pronged way. There's definitely, the repair aspect of it. If, we're very honest with our consultations here, if the flute needs more work put into it than, what is really the value of the instrument, definitely recommend putting that towards a new instrument. So in that aspect, if you feel like, you haven't played this flute that you were gifted 20 years ago and it's just been sitting there and now all of a sudden it needs an overhaul and the flute itself is only valued at that cost, definitely recommend put it into a new instrument. There's been a lot of advances, great flutes right now. And then in the other aspect of it, I'm not sure if this is how this person meant it, but just from a flutist perspective, if you feel, like that your instrument is in great shape from a repair standpoint, but that it's holding you back, that you can't do what you want to do with it, what you're capable of doing it. It's, you want to be able to grow with the instrument. If you feel like you're not able to do that anymore, then it is time for a new instrument. Any perspective there from the technician standpoint?
From a technician standpoint, well, like I said, I come where I come from in Texas, and I have to reference that because that's the mindset here. Is we feel the exact same way, is that after a few years of playing a particular flute, you should, kind of know the flute. And my recommendation is always buy the best flute you can. It doesn't, because someone was asking about materials, machine versus handmade, all of this. It really doesn't boil down to that. What it boils down to is the price point you can afford realistically. Don't play test a platinum flute if you can't really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't, and I play them all the time, and I'm like, oh, I wish. But I tell everyone the same set of advice. If you have a high school student who's doing marching band, I always recommend 2 flutes, a backup flute for marching field, and then of course an indoor concert flute is the first advice I give. And the advice I give in terms of purchasing a flute is the best flute you can afford that you sound the best on. If it's a Miyazawa 200 series, that's fine. They're great little handmade flutes. If it's a Powell Sonari 900 series, that's fine too. Don't get so caught up on what it has and what it doesn't have that you buy a flute that does not work for you.
Absolutely.
Because you might find that a flute you never thought of is the best fit for you. We have a great sales team, and I think they do the best job ever of not really pressuring you into buying something. They want you to find what works for you. That's the reason why we have, I believe, the largest selection. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. I know we have the largest selection of new and used inventory, both for flutes, head joints, harmony flutes, and everything else. If you're a diehard Louis Lott fan, congratulations. We got like 20 of them. We've got those. If you would like to play a Tulot, we have those as well. You want a Mendler? Got you covered. You name it, we probably have it.
And what I do with a lot of my clients here, and I recommend, if you're doing an at-home trial as well, is like David mentioned, don't get caught up in the specifics of things. So we do a lot of blind testing when I have a client that, has made a selection of 3 or 4, is not really quite sure which way to go. And so I'll listen, but I won't ask them, what flute it is. I'll turn my back. I'll just listen. And I say to them as well, just what sounds and feels the best to you. And really trust your gut on that. And if you came in, I need a Powell, but you fell in love with another brand, that's okay, because that flute is what resonates with you.
Exactly. We have all over the store, actually, we have these little Harry Potter reference stickers that says the wand chooses the wizard. It's the same way with flutes. That's the reason why there's no one maker. That's the reason why there's so many different makers now, is everyone does something very, very well that someone somewhere enjoys.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
Yep.
And-
So if you feel the flute is holding you back, but
Yeah.
definitely bring it in, get that consultation, see if it's you, the flute, or what next steps you want to take. And we're always here from a sales, from a service
Yep.
perspective, to really give you the best treatment possible. Okay, we have one more question here, and then we'll kind of open the floor a little bit for everybody in the audience. What do you think of the hypothesis that the lubricants used in flute key mechanisms blacken because they are dissolving silver in the key mechanisms over time? If this is true, then the flutes need expensive cleaning prematurely.
Okay.
That is definitely an answer for you.
Yes. Okay. The blackened stuff the people are referring to is if you clean a steel, you clean the internal portion of the tube, and then you put the steel in with oil, it comes out, it looks black. Why? Well, that's actually a two-part answer. One is there's actually silver oxidation inside the tube that you can't really get rid of. You can't really polish it out. It's just oxidation caused by the internal. And it's also combined with the silver. The black stuff on silver is actually referred to as silver sulfide. That's the actual chemical composition of that stuff. The best way to describe it, it's like a very, very fine staining and soot. But when that steel rubs against it internally, it does dislodge it. It does get lodged inside the oil that is used. And how many oils do I have on my desk right now? I believe I'm up to 4. We'll cover that in a second. But that's the black stuff that you're seeing on the oil. It's just silver sulfide breaking down into the oil itself. Is it toxic to the human? No, not at all. No more so than touching the oil itself. It doesn't cause any long-lasting issues in terms of health. Would I recommend you eat it? No, definitely keep, it's like, it's oil. Don't eat it. Don't put it in, in terms of eyes or anything of that nature, because it will irritate the crud out of you. Ask me how I know. I accidentally touched my face one time with oil on my finger. There, now you know. Now, in terms of here at Flute Center of New York, we actually have 4 different types of oil. We have Moromatsu has a proprietary oil that they recommend you use. They have an old style and a new style. We have both. Brandon has a particular formula they use for their flutes. We have that in stock as well. And we also have a generic silicon-based oil, medium weight, that is used for newer flutes as well. Then we have an ultra heavy oil that is used for more vintage flutes, i.e. Louis Lots, the more vintage flutes, French flutes, that the mechanism is not, it's not as tight or it's not as well made as a modern flute. That requires a particular oil just to keep it nice and lubricated and moving smoothly and not noisy. So that's a little bit thicker as well. So that's why, though it does turn black, is what you're seeing is the silver sulfide reacting to the steel and the oil. It's not a problem where the steel is eating the silver or anything of that nature. I don't know how that kind of came about, but that is a very, very common question we get in terms of why is the oil black? Well, that's why. Let's see here. Okay. Now, the reason for the cleaning, the COA we recommend every 12 to 18 months is because what the big problem on flutes is, the stuff you're actually seeing on the flute is actually dental stuff and also skin from your hands, skin particularly from your hands. In my case, I actually have the lotion I use is very thick. It's very similar to like Vaseline or any type of petroleum jelly is the best way to describe it. And it leaves massive amounts of deposits on flutes. That's the reason why I wear gloves most of the time whenever I'm working on flutes, is to prevent that. And so if you have that sort of issue, yes, you will have to have your flute cleaned professionally more often, just because of the amount of stuff you are putting onto your flute. And a real interesting thing is there's a 2011 ADA study, it's the American Dentological Association, I'll get it right eventually. They actually have a study of mouth and skin particles and particulates and secretions on musical instruments. They did this entire study and they actually took swabs of instruments and they found that, yeah, there's quite a bit of stuff on your musical instrument just because of playing it. So that's another reason why we keep, saying have your instrument looked at least every 12 to 18 months, is the amount of particulate in things on your flute can cause mold, mildew type issues, can cause, if you have a reoccurring cough or something of that nature, it can cause these sorts of respiratory problems. It's not uncommon for, yeah. I do recommend you read that. It's the 2011 ADA study. It does focus primarily on used musical instruments, but if you view it as you play your flute and you haven't really had it cleaned in 12 months, it's a used flute. So keep that in mind. So the other reason you could have what I refer to as premature cleaning issues or premature problems is self-care of the flute. So you're not actually taking the time away. You're not taking the time out to, you're not taking the time to properly clean and wipe down your flute, swab it out, remove all of the particulate that you can, so that you can maintain the instrument to its best and fullest potential. I personally have a client who enjoys, the only way to say this is drinking while playing. He's a gigging musician and he does a lot of gigs. He enjoys drinking while playing. I caution him against this, but a client's gonna client. I can't say anything, but he does send his flute in once every few years for a complete repad, like clockwork. So if you're okay spending the amount of money to have us redo the flute, we're fine with that. It's not our first choice, but we will do it. To answer a few other quick questions.
Yeah, we have time for a few more.
Yep.
I do think we got into everything that people have written in the chat. First of all, thank you so far for all of your key insights here and fun facts, lots of fun facts. But yeah, I want to open the floor to anybody here who has some specific questions that we didn't necessarily get to answer, or anything that popped up that's on your minds. And feel free, you can write them. Also, it would be nice to hear some voices if anybody wants to speak up.
Can I follow up a bit on the question about oiling the flute or the oils? I agree. What your explanation, I submitted that question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So your explanation is perfect, except for one thing. I'm really questioning the oil. So oils are made up of complex chemicals.
Yes.
And my question is, because I actually saw this, after a very short time, I saw my repair guy take out a rod, and we looked at it, and it was so black, I couldn't believe what I was seeing in such a short period of time. So my question is, couldn't there be something chemically in the oil that is dissolving the silver and therefore accelerating the process of this degradation inside the tube? Has anyone done the study? I mean,
yeah. I'm thinking in my head in terms of the oil compound itself. It might be an oil that I don't particularly use. In terms of repair, there's no manufacturers recommend oils, but of course, repair technicians can use whatever they want. The oils I use are generally the ones the makers recommend. Well, actually, they're the ones they are proprietary to those makers, really. The Moromatsu oil is literally a little bottle that says Moromatsu. Brannan has this particular formulation that's available from Brannan. And then the other oils I use are silicon-based synthetic. So they don't really contain as many hydrocarbon I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the hydrocarbon-based oils like clock oil and all of that.
Yeah.
The oils I use, and well, the oils we use here at Flute Center, because I don't allow the oils to be used flat out, I cannot speak on, simply because I do not use them. I don't use them for different reasons, that they become gummier faster than the synthetic versions that we use now, or the more proprietary versions that we use now. So to answer your question, I honestly don't know, is because I don't use those oils. So I would question what oil they were using first, because the oils we use here, we don't have those sorts of issues.
Yeah, so I'm talking about a new Moromatsu, and I presume they used their own oil when they built this thing.
Yes, yes.
So,
the Moromatsu oil, whenever it's introduced into the key, will come out kind of it should, if he's using the proprietary oil, it comes out kind of like a milky white looking texture. almost immediately, and that's just the oil reacting to the oxidation in the sulfides.
Right.
That's not a huge problem with the key work. But if it comes out super black and gunky, it could just be that there's a large amount of a sulfide present inside the key work that would cause that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh no, you're good.
Thank you for asking. Okay, so
I'm going to follow up though with Muramatsu about that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
definitely call and ask Jeff. I think Jeff would be the one to ask. So if you call and you get Val, which is very common, ask for Jeff in the repair department, and then I'm pretty sure we'll have the same thoughts on that. That's really interesting though.
Okay, Janet, and thank you so much, Joe, for asking your
thanks,
question.
Yeah.
Janet asked, what are your recommendations regarding flute repair in New York, then shipping the flute back to hot, humid Houston? Asked by a former Houstonian. What can be done to minimize the effects of weather and heat so that a good repair in New York does not go bad here or go bad during the return shipping?
Okay. One of the things we do here is when we do set up the flutes, we adjust them, like I said, to that 5,000. So when you do get it to Houston or a place that's a different environment, the change is negligible for us. The reason for that is here at Flute Center, we actually do not use paper shims or anything of that nature. We actually use hydrophobic papers only. We only use Mylar. We do not use components that expand or contract readily when shipped. The only exception to that is woven pads. And then in the woven pad, you won't really notice it, honestly. Professional flutes that we ship, there's no issues of shipping at all.
Yeah.
The only issues you may have are like beginner student level flutes, but even then it's not going to be noticeable because of the way the flutes are built at that point. And I'm not saying that as a caveat. I'm saying that as an actual mechanical critique of the instrument, the way they're manufactured is they're manufactured to a price point, whereas their key tolerances and such do not allow as mechanical perfectionists like a Brannon or Muramatsu or Nagahara or any of the other handmade brands. So it's a negligible change really in shipping. Yeah, I mean, we ship
so many flutes every day. Yeah. And, on our end, at least if you're shipping it to us, we really do our best so that absolutely nothing happens in shipping. But the weather is certainly interesting.
Yeah,
factor.
Man, sorry. We ship hundreds of flutes a day. So.
Yeah. Great. I think we have time for one more question since we did start a little bit late while we were waiting for everybody. Was there anything else that we can answer?
I don't know if we skipped. I don't want anybody to feel left out, so we're just going to scroll through quick. It's tarnish strips. Oh yeah. If there's feel free to toss in an anti-tarnish strip. All that does is absorb the sulfur in the air and help protect the silver. It's not that. That's fine. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Any other questions from anyone? I see people looking down. I don't know if they're writing or typing or.
Well, I will say we did get a lot of great questions covered today, and we did really try and get everything in the chat here. So thank you for chiming in along the way. If you guys do think of anything, we're always happy to help. So you can just call us or email us info@flutecenter.com, and one of our expert team members will get back to you. David, again, thank you for all your insights. And if you guys did enjoy this, please let us know. It's really the first one that we've done in this capacity here at Flute Center. We've joined some other forums and done them, but if you guys are interested, we would love to keep this going. So I'd love your feedback on this. Yeah. And I do see somebody raise their hand here. Yes. Jess.
Yes. Thank you guys for having this event. It's really great. Learning a lot. What is the average price for a COA?
Great question. Yeah.
Okay. Average, in other words, the standard cost is $550. That is complete assembly, cleaning, re-oiling, adjustments, all that as covered up to 3 pads. Beyond 3 pads, it's $80 per pad additional. So if you have like 5 pads, well, it's +2, so you have to add in $160 to the repair. But the base cost is $550, and we don't. We only quote repairs that are needed. So if you don't need a COA and you only need a couple hour, like an hour of adjustment, that's a different rate. We don't really quote work that's not needed. I don't do it. So any other questions, comments, concerns?
Oh, well,
Oh,
thank you,
thank you.
everybody. We certainly enjoyed it on our
Yeah.
end. I hope everybody
And
that joined.
if you have
enjoyed it
any
as well.
questions, feel free to send us an email. Feel free to, call and ask. If you have a long formatted question, please send it as an email, especially if it's a very complex answer. I might actually just have to call you to explain it. But, if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to call us and contact us.
Happy
We're
to
always here
help.
to answer.
Again, this is David Sheppard here. My name is Lauren. The two of us are always happy to help, and we have a wonderful team here that can really answer any question you have. So thank you so much for joining, and I hope to catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.